Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic the Gathering are two wildly different card games with entirely different rules and mechanics. So how difficult would it be to turn Yugi Muto's Duelist Kingdom deck into Magic the Gathering cards? Turns out it would be super easy. Just look at Beaver Warrior. In Magic it would be a Beaver Warrior, obviously. Curse of Dragon, that's gotta have flying, right? And how would magical hats work in Magic anyway? Get comfortable because we have a lot of cards to talk about today. Yugi started the Duelist Kingdom saga with a deck of 52 cards, mostly Earth and Dark attribute normal monsters coupled with spells. We're not counting the Exodia cards since Weevil Underwood tossed those into the ocean on the cruise to Duelist Kingdom, and I already covered them in another video. That means we're going to look at 19 normal monsters, 4 effect monsters, 2 ritual monsters, 3 fusion monsters, 22 spells, and 2 traps in total. Some disclaimers. My main goal is to adapt all cards as faithfully as possible. My secondary goal is to make effects make sense in Magic, so some cards won't be translated word for word, or I might have to invent brand new mechanics to make them work. Third, if flavor or creative liberty calls for it, I might tweak a card a little bit here and there. Some vanillas in Yu-Gi-Oh! Might become French vanillas in Magic, for example. Let's start with the normal monsters, 9 of which would be basic vanillas in Magic. Yugi doesn't really use fire attribute monsters this season, but I felt like Battlesteer would fit as a red creature in Magic the Gathering. Since it's a 5-star monster, I'd make it cost 4 generic and 1 red. It would be a 4/3 Minotaur Warrior. Kinda overcosted, don't you think? So is a 5-star monster with 1800 attack and no effect. Beaver Warrior is pretty straightforward. 2 generic, 1 green Beaver Warrior with 2 power and 3 toughness. Did you know its Japanese name is actually Louise for some reason? Come to think of it, what kind of beaver has a tail like that? Anyway, moving on to Celtic Guardian, which already appeared in a previous video as well. Go check out the playlist if you haven't already, and like and subscribe if you like watching me turn cards into other cards. Beaver Warrior might have a strange Japanese name, but Feral Imp is called Gremlin in the OCG, which actually makes a lot of sense. In Magic, it would be a 3/3, well, Gremlin for 2 generic and 1 black mana. Griffor is a beast in Yu-Gi-Oh! And look at that, there's a beast type in MTG as well. It would cost 3 generic and 1 green for a 3/4. If there's a type that would fit Griffor better, I'm all ears. Not even sure what a Griffor is anyway. There is an imp type in Magic though, so Horn Imp should also feel right at home. I figured it could cost 2 black for a 3/2. In doing research for this video, I was surprised to learn that this card never actually appeared in the TCG. While Yugi had a lot of dark monsters, Light made an occasional appearance in his deck as well. Mystical Elf would cost 3 generic and 1 white mana for a 2/5 Elf Cleric. She was one of Yugi's 2 trusty blockers this season, so giving her such a high toughness felt appropriate. Since Silverfang is a white wolf with a connection to the moon, I thought it made sense to make it a wolf for 2 generic and 1 white mana. Yugi has a lot of basic monsters, so this is just another vanilla 3/2. And while we're at it, Torike is just a 3/1 beast for 1 generic and 1 green. That wraps up our purely vanilla monsters. Now we move on to the 10 French vanillas, monsters that are pretty much vanillas but have a little extra flavor to them, or in other words, some basic keyword abilities. Early Yu-Gi-Oh! Was actually heavily inspired by Magic the Gathering, as we can see with flying monsters like Curse of Dragon. This would be a 5/4 dragon that can be summoned for 4 generic and 1 black mana, and it would of course have flying. Speaking of flying dragons, Yugi would have a couple more. Komori Dragon is another dark dragon that's not quite as powerful, so it would cost 2 generic, 2 black, and be a 4/3. Its flavor text made me feel like it deserved an extra black mana symbol in its cost. While Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress #1 is a recognizable monster, I felt this one needed some tinkering. For one, I think this name is just way too long for an average MTG creature. I think this could just be called Guardian of the Fortress for a more OG Magic feel. Upon closer inspection, it has 2 wings and 2 legs, which technically makes it a wyvern, and that would make it a drake in Magic. I made it cost 3 generic and 1 blue for a 3/3 drake with flying. Dragons often have flying, but what do knights have? Well, flanking seems appropriate. Gaia the Fierce Knight would cost 3 generic and 2 white. He is Earth attribute, but being such a valiant knight, it seemed like he'd fit better in white than in green. He'd be a 5/5 human knight with flanking. For those who might not know, this gives -1/-1 to any creature that blocks it, unless that creature also has flanking. Perks of riding a horse. Magic the Gathering doesn't have rock-type creatures like Yu-Gi-Oh! Does, but it does have golems. Giant Soldier of Stone would be a golem artifact creature costing 3 generic to summon. It would be a 3/5 with Defender, since this stat line is pretty good for just 3 generic, and since the monster's greatest utility is as a defensive tool anyway. Now Yugi was no zombie duelist, that distinction went to Bones, but he did have a couple zombies in his deck this saga. Given its zombifying shenanigans in Yugi's castle duel against Kaiba, I felt that Mammoth Graveyard deserved some zombie flavor. It would be a 3/2 zombie elephant for 2 generic and 1 black, but it would also have regenerate for 1 generic and 1 black mana. Yugi also played Zombie Warrior as a normal monster this season, but it's actually a fusion card in the official TCG. Don't worry, we'll get to fusions later. This basic Zombie Warrior would cost 1 generic and 2 black for a 3/3, well, Zombie Warrior, and it would have regenerate for just 1 black instead. In comparing Yu-Gi-Oh! To Magic, it's interesting to note that only a small subset of monsters, toon monsters, are known to have summoning sickness. Unless otherwise noted, it could be said that every Yu-Gi-Oh! Monster should have haste. While it would be impractical and boring to apply that to every creature in these videos, I think Rude Kaiser deserves it. I'd make it a 5/4 Lizard Warrior with haste. It would cost 3 generic and 2 red mana to summon. I know this is more of a Kaiba card, but Yugi did technically use it this season as well. While it's clear that Yu-Gi-Oh! Borrowed some ideas from Magic the Gathering, sometimes it feels like more than just inspiration. Just look at this classic MTG creature. Remind you of anyone? Oh yeah, Summon Skull. Taking some notes from Lord of the Pit, I'd make Summon Skull a 6/3 demon costing 3 generic and 3 black to summon. It would have flying and trample to justify that beefy mana cost. And finally, I covered Dark Magician in my first Yu-Gi-Oh! To MTG video. Some people felt that Hexproof was a little too strong and felt that Dark Magician should have been partially blue as well. I heard your feedback, so I think an updated Dark Magician would cost 5 generic, 1 blue, and 1 black for a 7/6 human wizard with ward 3. Thoughts on this update? Would you do it differently? Let me know how down below. Moving on to effect monsters, this is where things start to get a little tricky, so bear with me. In the real TCG, Catapult Turtle allows you to tribute 1 monster to inflict damage equal to half its attack to your opponent's life points. The modern version caps this at once per turn, although it never used to have this limitation. The anime version was a bit different, with an effect to destroy a wall or fortress, while also giving the launched monster an extra 600 attack. Bearing all this in mind, the Magic version of Catapult Turtle would be a legendary 2/5 artifact creature turtle for 3 generic, 1 blue, and 1 red. Tap. Target creature you control gets +2/+0. Sacrifice that creature, then Catapult Turtle deals damage to target player equal to half that creature's power. Kinda clunky, but it works, right? Like Dark Magician, we covered Karibo in the first video, and I decided to make it multicolor for flavor reasons. However, I learned through feedback that it might be fine in just black. For the redesign, let's just make it cost 1 generic and 1 black for a 1/1 demon with flying. However, rather than making it a black-aligned ripoff of Selfless Squire, I'll just give it Channel instead. For 2 generic and 1 black, discard Karibo, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you this turn. Is this Karibo too busted, too weak, or just right? Let me know what you think. Sangan is another Dark Fiend in Yugi's deck with a helpful effect. When it goes from the field to the graveyard, you can add a monster with 1500 or less attack from your deck to your hand. The modern errata prevents that monster's effect from being used for the rest of the turn. Like I said, we're mostly concerned about faithfully adapting the anime cards within reason, so let's make Sangan a 2/1 demon beast for 3 black mana. When it dies, you can search your library for a creature with power 4 or less, add it to your hand, then shuffle. Fairly self-explanatory. What will take way more explaining is the effect of Dark Sage. As you might remember, Yugi debuted this monster in his semifinals duel against Joey Wheeler when the latter activated the effect of Time Wizard. Even though Yugi doesn't play Time Wizard in his own deck, he technically was the one to give it to Joey on the ship to the island, and we'll need to explain how an MTG Time Wizard would work first. Time Wizard's printed effect lets you toss a coin and call it. If you call it right, you get to Raigeki your opponent, but if you call it wrong, you Raigeki yourself and take some potentially hefty effect damage. However, Time Wizard's effect can also be used to age certain monsters in both the anime and the TCG, turning Joey's Baby Dragon into Thousand Dragon and turning Red Eye's Black Dragon and Harpy Lady into decrepit old fossils. It also turns Yugi's Dark Magician into the Dark Sage, which is roughly how it works in the real-life card game as well. So how do we translate all of this faithfully to Magic the Gathering? Time Wizard would cost 1 generic, 1 white, and 1 blue for a 1/1 artifact creature wizard. It has an activated ability called Time Magic for 2 generic and 2 blue. Flip a coin. If you win the flip, all players may time jump any number of creatures they control, then destroy all non-time jumped creatures your opponents control. To time jump a creature, sacrifice it and search your hand or library for its time jumped version, then place it onto the battlefield under your control. If you lose the flip, destroy all creatures you control, then you lose life equal to half the combined power of those creatures rounded up. Activate this ability only once each turn and only as a sorcery. So what about Dark Sage? Well, he'd be a human wizard for 6 generic, 1 blue, 1 black. He'd have Ward 3, 7 power, 8 toughness, and time jumped Dark Magician to signify that it can evolve with the help of Time Wizard. When Dark Sage enters the battlefield, if it was time jumped, search your library for a sorcery card and add it to your hand, then shuffle. The MTG Dark Sage would be very useful for tutoring out any sorcery you might need, and this deck has a few, but not as many as you might think. We'll kick things off with Brain Control, a sorcery for 2 generic and 1 black mana. As an additional cost to cast this spell, pay 2 life. Take control of target creature until end of turn. As mentioned earlier, Magic the Gathering doesn't have rock-type creatures like Yu-Gi-Oh does, so Breath of Light needs some adjustment. It would cost 1 generic and 1 white to destroy all golem creatures, the closest creature type I could find. While sorceries are probably Magic's closest analogs to Yu-Gi-Oh's spell cards, they can't exist on the battlefield as permanents, so Dispel also needs a tune-up. Dispel would be a sorcery costing 1 generic and 1 green, destroy target enchantment. A lot of these effects seem pretty straightforward, but Duelist Kingdom was notorious for rule bending or outright breaking shenanigans, as well as effects that seemed highly situational. For example, a lot of battles this season were decided by field advantage and flavor, and this actually mirrors MTG's early commitment to flavor over function as well, to be fair. Mutou the Magical Mist is one card whose anime effect was completely different. Since there are no thunder types in Magic, Mutou the Magical Mist would cost 2 generic and 1 blue. Creatures you control named Summon Skull get +3/+3 until end of turn. Artifact creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. In both MTG and Yu-Gi-Oh, restarting a board you've already built up seems counterintuitive at first glance. However, there are legitimate reasons to do so, like if your opponent has your creatures locked down with enchantments, or if you want to remove negative counters from them, for example. Monster Recovery would cost 2 generic, 1 blue, and 1 green. Shuffle all cards you own in your hand and all creatures you own and control into your library, then draw 5 cards. For another card whose utility I did not understand the first time I read it as a kid, there's Soul Release. In both games, the obvious play is to use it to disrupt graveyard-based strategies or prevent your opponent from reviving one of their fallen creatures. It would cost 2 generic and 1 white to exile up to 5 cards from a single graveyard. Lastly, we have the cheapest sorcery called the Eye of Truth, which forces target player to reveal their hand for the rest of the turn. Knowledge is power, but whether it's enough power to warrant a card and a white mana is up to you. Monster Reborn and Dark Hole were 2 sorceries already covered in earlier videos, so feel free to check out those for more details. Yugi's Duelist Kingdom deck would have just 1 artifact, Book of Secret Arts for 1 blue mana. Equipped Wizard gets +1/+1, and you can equip it for 1 generic. Although Yugi's deck had other equip spells, these would make more sense as auras than as artifacts. For 1 white mana, Full Moon would grant an enchanted beast or wolf +1/+1. Meanwhile, Horn of the Unicorn would cost 1 generic and 1 green and give enchanted creature +2/+2, with the option to put it on top of your library when that creature dies. For the last enchantment of the deck, we have Burning Land for 3 red mana. When Burning Land enters the battlefield, destroy target land. During each player's upkeep, Burning Land deals 1 damage to that player. Speaking of enchantments, I made Swords of Revealing Light an enchantment in the very first video of this series. Moving on to the instance, Living Arrow was one that always stumped me, due in large part to how Yugi screwed the rules against Kaiba to fuse his mammoth skeleton with Kaiba's dragon to make it rotten somehow. Season 1 was really just homebrew D&D with cards in my opinion. Anyway, the idea behind this card is to apply a spell card's effect that would normally target only your monster to an opponent's monster instead. Without knowing any use cases for this adaptation, Living Arrow would cost 1 blue and 1 green. If a spell you cast would target a creature you control, it targets a creature your opponent controls instead. Crucially, it's not just any spell, which would obviously be generically useful, but specifically a spell you cast. Got any thoughts on how to make this one work? Magical Hats offers some more readily apparent utility, protecting Yugi's Dark Magician numerous times in a very on-flavor, sleight-of-hand kind of way. The MTG iteration would cost 3 generic and 1 blue. Target wizard you control gains Morph for 1 generic and 1 blue, then turn it face down. It's a 2/2 creature. Then search your library for up to 3 sorcery or instant cards and place them face down on the battlefield under your control. They are 2/2 creatures. Then shuffle these cards. If your opponent targets a face-down sorcery or instant you control, you may cast it as though it had flash. Hiding a monster under a hat is one thing, but what about swapping it for an even stronger one? Monster Replace allowed Yugi to do just that. For 3 generic and 2 green, return target creature you control to its owner's hand. Then put another creature card from your hand onto the battlefield under your control. But let's say you don't have any high power creatures in your hand to swap out, but you do control a Kuriboh. Multiply will help you get some more mileage out of it. For 2 generic, 1 white, 1 black, sacrifice target creature you control with power and toughness 1/1 or less. Create 5 tapped 1/1 token copies of that creature. Yugi's magical hats weren't the only trick up Dark Magician's sleeve. Mystic Box was another way Yugi eliminated enemy threats, although the anime version was way more vague and situational than the real-life iteration. The card's description literally just read, "A combo attack can be done with Dark Magician." The real-life card pops 1 enemy monster in exchange for giving your opponent a monster you control, so the MTG translation would cost 1 generic and 1 black. Destroy target creature target opponent controls, then that opponent gains control of target creature you control. As you can tell, the 2 ritual spells from Yugi's deck, Dark Magic Ritual and Black Luster Ritual, are both conspicuously absent so far. In adapting these monsters to Magic's rule set, I realized that ritual monsters wouldn't be nearly worth it to require 2 separate cards in addition to other sacrifices, so I decided to nix these ritual spells in favor of making ritual its own separate mechanic. Black Luster Soldier would have a printed mana cost of 6 generic, 1 white, and 1 black for an 8/7 human soldier with vigilance, but it would also have Ritual 8. Instead of paying the spell's mana cost, you sacrifice creatures whose total combined mana values equal or exceed 8. Looking back, I feel like tribute summoning became a simplified version of what ritual summoning was always meant to be, and this summoning mechanic would later go on to inspire several other level-based mechanics in the future. You're literally offering up tributes in a magic ritual to bring forth a more powerful monster. And speaking of magic rituals, Magician of Black Chaos would have a printed cost of 5 generic, 1 blue, and 2 black for a 7/6 human wizard with ward 4. It would also have Ritual 8. What are your thoughts? Would you rather see ritual spells still in the game? If so, how would you translate them? Let me know down in the comments. There's one even more iconic mechanic that I felt deserved to be more of a direct adaptation. I couldn't let Yugi's Polymerization get lost in translation, so it would be a sorcery costing Wooburg. Sacrifice and/or discard 2 or more creatures, then put 1 fusion creature card from your hand or library onto the battlefield under your control that has the corresponding creatures in its fusion cost. So how would the fusion monsters themselves look? Black Skull Dragon would have a printed mana cost of 6 generic, 2 black, and 1 red for an 8/6 fusion creature Demon Dragon with flying and trample. It would also have the keyword fusion, Red Eyes Black Dragon, Summon Skull. You sacrifice and/or discard these creature cards after casting a spell called Polymerization rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Gaia the Dragon Champion would have a printed cost of 5 generic, 1 white, and 1 black for a 6/5 human knight dragon with flying and flanking. It would also have fusion with Curse of Dragon and Gaia the Fierce Knight in its fusion cost. There's one more fusion monster waiting in the wings, but we have to tackle Yugi's trap cards before we go any further. Surprisingly, he only had 2 trap cards in his deck this whole season, probably because he often used spell cards like trap cards anyway, because he's the king of games and he can do whatever he wants. We already covered Mirror Force in a previous video, but the season also saw Yugi using the Spellbinding Circle card. The real-life version of the card prevents an enemy monster from changing its battle position or attacking. So, Spellbinding Circle would cost 1 generic and 1 blue for an aura, enchant creature. Tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its owner's untap step. Before we cover Yugi's final fusion monster, we have to examine another one first. Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, which would have a printed cost of 9 generic, 2 white, and 1 blue for a flying 11/9 dragon with trample. We had to cover Kaiba's biggest monster because Yugi had one other fusion monster in his arsenal this season. Dragon Master Knight, a fusion of Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon and Black Luster Soldier. This would have a printed cost of 9 generic, 1 white, 1 blue, and 1 black for a 12/12 human soldier dragon with flying, trample, and vigilance. And that's Yugi's Duelist Kingdom deck translated into Magic. What cards were your favorites? Got any ideas for how you'd adapt these cards better than I did? And most importantly, whose deck do you want to see next? Whether in Duelist Kingdom, Battle City, or beyond? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments, and if you've made it this far, a like and a subscribe would be much appreciated. Thanks for watching!